cold, rainy Sunday. We don't have football season, so it's usually a little safer in the spring here to do the classes versus see hot Sundays in the fall. So, we're going to talk a little conifers today, kind of everything evergreen. I think we'll probably maybe do this a little bit differently and kind of go through some things pretty fast and let you guys ask a bunch of questions. I find a lot of times with gardeners, the same question you have will be similar to the one he wants to ask, and we've all got kind of similar plants around here. So hopefully we'll get a little more specific, some info you need too. So hopefully you got the handout. This has got a little bit of everything on there. We're not going to make you memorize Latin today, but it's an easy way to kind of think of conifers and these different genuses as we show you a few things. So you don't have to memorize, you don't have to spell them correctly, just use it as kind of a guide. A lot of times if you go online and look at some excellent websites, ours will be one of them. We've got a lot of information on there. Or if you go to even a grower website like Isley Nursery, you'll see at the bottom of the handout, great pictures, great information for gardeners, but they're going to all be organized by Latin. So if you start typing in, Hinoki Cypress or some common name, you're not going to come up with anything. So we got to just put it in by genus, then we can search and you can look at all the different options on a lot of stuff online as well. Okay. So if we kind of just start with a few basic things, conifers, we're the evergreen state, right? So we have lots of conifers up here. We've typically got acidic soil. We've got lots of moisture. The rain's coming down today. So evergreens do very well. We've got a lot of native stuff. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But certainly I find a lot of gardeners don't have room for another 80-foot Douglas fir or a 60-foot western red cedar or an 80-foot western hemlock or whatever it is you're adding. Some people have room. We can add native things like that, but we're looking at a lot of dwarf cultivars or ornamental things we can add into our yard for texture, for color, different forms, different sizes. I think you start getting into conifers like many of us have, you're going to see a massive amount of choice. From tiny little moss on the rocks, we call them, that hardly ever grow, to things that get massive and huge. Weeping type specimens, different things in the yard. You kind of pick what works for you. The one thing that's a little tough sometimes, I think, with gardeners is pruning of these things. And a lot of times we buy a conifer, we take it home, it grows for 5 years, then we want to go back to the way it was 5 years ago. And this is a plant we cannot do that with. So if you think of the way these conifers grow, I've got new growth, I grow tall, I grow wide, whatever your structure is, I can't cut back into bare wood or I've never got growth again. So this is something we lightly prune every year or every other year. We don't wait 5 years and then try to go back. Well, now it's 5 feet wide. I want it back to this wide. We're going to probably have some issues. So hopefully part of that is helping you today choose the right plant to start with so you don't have to maybe do as much pruning on it, but also giving you the information that if you do prune, doing it the right way and maybe not turning into bare wood here and there. Okay? So we've got lots of colors, lots of textures, lots of sizes. If you look up here, you can kind of see a big variety of different things. You'll even see some bare plants, which we'll talk about, like how to not be a conifer. Yes, it is. So we've got a few things that even lose their needles. We've got a lot of green around here, and I would never complain about that. If anybody reads my boring column every week, last week was 50 shades of green for St. Patrick's Day. We certainly probably have 50 shades of green around here. And it's not to say you don't want more green, but yellows, blues, different shades of green are going to add some interest to the landscape year-round. We get to the fall, everything loses its leaves, the perennials die to the ground. What's left in the garden to look at? And a lot of times it's the interesting conifers that we choose. They're going to give us the structure, the textures, the different colors that we like in our yard here over the wintertime. Okay? Now this is one plant you get what you pay for. I think that's a good lesson in life. My dad taught me years and years and years ago, and I'll never forget. You got your Rolexes, you got the Timex. It's not that one's bad and one's better, but one tends to probably last longer, and one's probably going to give you what you need. With conifers is the highest example of plants. You're going to look at stuff out there that's $50 for a plant this big, and you're going to look at something else that's 5 feet tall for $50. And guess what the difference is? Growth rate. If it grows slow and grows miniature, it might be what you want in your yard, and you're going to pay a little bit more for it because you're not going to have to do long-term maintenance. If we want something fast and quick, it's going to be a lot cheaper. We're not trying to gouge you for one plant versus another because it's more popular. Most people in conifer land, think of the magical word dwarf and what your mind picture. If I had to close your eyes and said, tell me what dwarf is, you're going to go, ooh, this little tiny, little round plant that never gets very big and I never have to touch it. Well, in conifers, that's probably miniature, not dwarf. You know, dwarfs are a super relative word depending on what plant it is. Some dwarfs are small, other dwarfs might be 10, 12, 15 feet still versus the species. So think of miniature versus dwarf and always look at the growth rate. That's the most important thing to me, because if you do want slow and steady, we've got stuff that grows a 1/4 inch a year. Other stuff will grow 2 feet a year. So, I mean, you've got all kinds of variations in there with the conifers that we'll talk about today. And that's a big part of the pruning, the landscape location, and kind of which ones you're choosing to put in the yard, okay? If you do need to prune, there's really 2 kinds of things up here. And if we kind of show you, if you look in the front, that's actually ponderosa pine. We finally find one of our eastern Washington natives, which is actually a big old tree. So we have ponderosa pine on our property, probably getting up there 30, 40 feet when we get old. So that's not a miniature, it's not a dwarf, that's a giant evergreen. But as an example of how conifer grows, if we look at that tree, what does that look like? I've got a central trunk, and I've got whorls or rings of branches that are pretty symmetrical. If we think of our Christmas tree we might have had inside, noble fir. We look at pines like that, spruce trees. A lot of tall evergreens have that perfect conical structure. They've got a leader, and we have perfect rings of branches as it develops, and that's how we get our big pyramidal form. So if we're going to prune something like that, we have a tough time, you know, cutting it back again after a few years. So if I'm going to prune that, I'm never going to top it because I have ruined my tree for all eternity. I'm not going to have my leader anymore. But if I wanted to keep it narrower or slow it down some, I can clip the candles on a pine tree. So in a couple months, those little candles you see on there that are brown will open up. I can clip those in half. I could even pinch them off every other year, and that would keep the spread down. It will grow a little slower, a little tighter, but I can't top it, okay? So if I even had something smaller growing than that, and again, I wait 5 years, and it's like, wait a minute, I want to go back to the way it was, I cannot cut to bare wood. You might as well go in and take that whole branch and get rid of it, or limb the tree up from the ground so you can walk underneath it or garden underneath it. Is that kind of making sense to everybody? So the other end of conifers, we could pick a few up here, but if we think, like, who's got arborvitae, like the living green fence? You know, we've got yews. You know, a lot of people use yews as foundation plants, or, again, narrow plants. Cypresses, junipers, hemlock, believe it or not. A lot of those plants are what we call random branch conifers. So if I look at the difference, as an example, if I bring the cypress over in front here, and I look at that versus the pine, they look like 2 totally different plants, obviously, but it's the growth structure. I've got no room on those stems. I've got long needles with lack of buds. With something like cypress, you can see our grower can shear this, and it will just get tighter and denser and fuller, where I probably can't do that as much with the world conifers. That kind of, so if we look at our arborvitae hedge, I can clip the sides, I can top it, because I'm just looking for that green wall. I can't wait 5 years, especially on the top I can, but on the sides, let's say it gets about 3 feet wide, I want to go back to there, I can't cut to bare wood again, or I'm going to have a big brown dead patch, which I see a lot of that driving around. That's a pretty common hedge plant. We be real careful with the chainsaw and the stick, and we just stay where it's green. Light every year, great. Wait 3 years, I think you're taking a chance of getting in there and maybe cutting a little bit too much, okay? So the point is, you know, evergreen is kind of a misnomer a little bit. You know, we think evergreen, we probably think that that needle that grew is going to be on that tree for all eternity. When my grandkids are born, I'm going to still have that needle on there. It's not the case. You know, we have 3 years. New growth comes out, it sits for another year, go another year, and then what do we have here in our climate in the late summer, fall? We got a whole bunch of brown that sheds out of the middle. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with the plant. Doesn't mean we have an issue. That's flagging. That's that older than 3-year-old needles that are dropping out, giving us mulch down at the base. We can clean it up. We can use it in the garden. But it's always going to be that process. You know, 3 years at the most, we drop our needles because the new ones replace them that spring. Okay? So is that kind of, you can always ask if you want as we go, but that'll give you an idea, especially when we talk about taller things. If we have whorl type structure or random branch, you know, there's choices for both and a lot of different colors. But we just got to be careful, I think, again, which one we choose when we're picking for that special spot in the yard. All right? Now, a lot of these creatures up here, I'm trying to think if there's even one up here that isn't drought tolerant. Okay, so if we're looking to cut down our water usage, especially when things get established, the hemlocks, the yews will take a little bit more water than most, but the vast majority of stuff up here is going to be on the top end of drought tolerance. So we want to plant this outside, water it when it's young, let it get developed, and then down the road, probably walk away. A lot of this stuff's just like our native conifers. You know, there's nobody out watering their Douglas fir tree, you know, on the road in the middle of the summer. It's got plenty of roots. It's got plenty of moisture built up. It's going to be happy unless we have a very strange drought here. Okay? Now, real quick, if we talk just a little bit about planting. Like I mentioned, the number one thing I would probably send you home with really no exceptions up here is drainage. You know, if we've got an area, there's only a few conifers, there's shrubs, there's some things as well that will grow in really wet areas, heavy clay. We got to be very careful with those spots. The vast majority of this is going to want to high and dry. So if we have good drainage, we've got areas built up, we don't want to water much down the road, excellent choices for minimal watering. This is a lot of my landscape in the front that faces south, and it might get watered once a month in the summertime, and it's perfectly happy. And I don't even know that I have to do that anymore with the conifer part of it. So we're going to go drought tolerant. Picking the right plant for the right spot. Like I mentioned, the growth rate. What is your structure? Nothing drives me crazier than seeing at the house and you've got a little spot by the front porch. You want an evergreen, which is a great choice. It's there year round, but you buy something that gets super wide and super big. So you're stuck pruning it every year, or you let it go onto the porch, and now what do? I got to get it back off of there. So look at your options for the cultivars, the growth rate in your particular placement and landscape, and we get you the right variety so you don't have to mess with it down the road. All right? Now you'll see two types of plants up here. I didn't bring a lot, but the big one's on the end. So this is an Alaskan cedar, weeping Alaskan cedar. This is slender Hinoki cypress, the two biggest things up here. So those are two examples of things that we get in that are field grown. So a big root ball dug out of a nursery field, balled in burlap, tied up nice and tidy, shipped to us that we can plant in a pot with some compost. So you probably get a little more tree for your money doing it that way. It's a little heavier to take home and plant, but we're going to get a little better value, I think, as a consumer for money for the size. The biggest thing I try to tell people is don't take the burlap sack off. I should make everybody promise they'll never do it again, because if we lose a plant like that, it's because I took it home, I took the twine off, I picked it up, dropped it in my hole, and the root ball cracks or fissures. We lose the root system, the tree crashes. You're going to call me in about 6 months. It usually takes about 6 to 8 months for a conifer to crash out. You're going to go, it's not green, it's looking brown, it's getting browner. Almost always it's that reason, because we were not careful and gentle with that root ball. So be careful with it. When you take it out, set it in the hole like it is, get your backfilling done, most of the soil goes in. The last thing we do is cut the twine off of the trunk. You can pull it right out of the ball, leave the burlap in the hole, just peel it over to the sides, or a lot of times I'll just take my knife or pruners and we just cut the top excess off, mulch over the top, we're good to go. We were careful that way. The vast majority of stuff, everything that's not field grown is going to be can grown. So if I pull out a plant, let's see if I can get him to slide out. You know, this was grown in a container. So I should see a pretty good dose of surface root. This is a Hinoki cypress. That if I take this home and plant it, I'm still going to be careful. I'm not going to dig in and try to rip this thing apart, but I will grab my pruners and just lightly score the outside of that so that I tell it, okay, you're done growing in a circle, you've got some free soil, let's take off and get growing. Sometimes I chop the bottom inch off. You know, if you see a mat of roots down there, a lot of times you can lay it on the side real careful and just take the shovel lightly and chop that last little mat at the bottom off. But again, I'm not tearing this open, I'm not trying to damage the plant, I just want to loosen it just a little bit, okay? So everything out there for conifers, you're going to see literally those two choices. Do I buy a bigger one in a burlap sack, or do I buy a small can-grown one that's a little easier to transport home? Yes?
I've noticed with balls and burlap that the growers, they tend to bury the root flare a little bit. Is that something to kind of watch out for when you're planting?
You should always, you'll always see on a ball and burlap, whether it's this or a dogwood tree or a maple, you're always going to see a water line on there. You can see where that soil was in his field, and I never want to bury up deeper than that. I would say that what I do with this stuff, and I'd probably suggest the same thing, is I'm never planting things on an anthill. It's not that. But if I set that in my ground and I leave it just a little bit above the grade, I've created just a slight little gentle berm that I can bring mulch back up and get my level perfect. Does that help a little bit? Okay, all right. So we've got a little bit of that field growing. Fertilizing, you shouldn't really have to do a lot of feeding with these things. You know, we've got healthy soil, always means healthy plants. I would be shocked if anybody here did not have acidic soil, which they prefer. Like 99% of Western Washington is going to be acidic. If you're curious, you can always run a pH test and check your number. But all these things are going to thrive in our typical Western Washington soil. We need something down there, 5.5, 6, 6.5 up to neutral. We start getting too sweet, sometimes they will struggle a little bit and probably let you know. But there's ways we can acidify soil with sulfur, with aluminum sulfate, with some different compounds if you need to. But again, I would be shocked if you had to worry about making your soil more acidic in our specific area. Yes?
Thoughts on permatill? I've got clay soil that tends to, you know, not really great drainage.
Yeah.
So
clay is always going to be, there's going to be a few things when I show you some plants here that are going to work for a little more clay. But clay is always going to be the enemy of the vast majority of this. If we've got heavy clay, especially in the wintertime, it's real soupy. We can add compost, we can add maybe some gypsum, might help break that up a little bit. But we have to improve the soil, and it's probably not going to be a place we're going to put a pine, a spruce, a cypress, those things that don't deal with the heavier soils. But the yews, the hemlocks, some of the thuja, some other stuff we could use in those areas. Yeah, for sure. Okay? So again, watch your pruning a little bit, but if you're going to feed, you know, these are only two things I brought up here, and you saw I brought 2 bagged soils. So this is what I've really went to these days for the vast majority of my non-blooming landscape, we'll call it. I don't need a bunch of phosphorus. I don't need a bunch of potassium. Little bit's great, root system, overall health, but I'm not looking to pump flowers out on my pine tree. I mean, it's as easy as that. So I don't need, none of the organic foods are ever going to hurt anything, but if I'm going to buy something these days, I'm going for that tree shrub food. They got a conifer on the bag, and they got a lace leaf maple. That's kind of my go-to organic food these days for just things that need nitrogen. I need healthy leaves. I want good color. I'm not worried about bud and bloom. This is not going to help my rose. This is going to help things in my yard that are just about foliage, okay? We would never also lose with rhododendron food. That's for all acidic plants. Again, it's balanced more for the azalea, the camellia, the rhododendron because they do bloom, but that would be the other thing I've used traditionally on some different conifers. Now, should you have to go out and feed your old Douglas fir, whatever you've had for years, you should probably never have to feed it, to be honest with you. It's happy the way it is. When I put something in, I'm going to feed it if that's my choice. And maybe smaller things I could do once a year. I'm not running through and feeding every conifer in my yard every single season. I wouldn't tell you to do that either. But when they're newly planted, yes, we would use some of that. Maybe when they're a little younger to get them going a little stronger, yes, we might use it. Am I going to go feed my 20-year-old Hinoki cypresses anymore? They look great. They got good color. I'm not going to worry about it. You know, that's not something I've fed for probably 5-6 years now. But if I wanted to, this would be the way I'd go. One time, this time of year is plenty. If you really wanted to get it, maybe you're the opposite and I'm trying to hide the neighbor with the conifer and I want it to grow a little faster. Maybe we do it once now, we do it one more time, you know, like mid-May, early June. That's plenty for the season, okay? The soils down there, the compost, like what she mentioned about drainage. So this is the corrector of both. If I had sandy soil, I dig my hole where I'm going to plant my new conifer. I've got my backfill over here. I'm going to mix that 1/3 with 2/3 of my native soil. If I have clay, it's going to help break it up a little bit. If I have sandier soil, it's going to also help it retain moisture when it gets dry in the summer. So compost is always the way to go. The other one I brought is that pink bag. So that's kind of a new soil up here that we call these hybrid soils. That's built-in acidity, so if you're worried about your place being not so acidic, that would help with that as well. But let's say I'm going to plant one of these in a pot, which I do a lot of at my house. I'm not going to use potting soil because it's not acidic. That's the potting soil I'm going to choose to use because it has the acidity built in. So I have blueberries in pots, I've got pines in pots, I got different conifers. That's the soil mixture I would choose versus just normal, generic, organic potting soil, because that's always going to be neutral or slightly alkaline. Is that kind of making sense? So I can use that as an amendment or as a straight potting soil. Okay? So let's see if we're going to go through, last one here before we get into the plants. You'll see insect diseases, and I wrote flagging on there. So I mentioned the browning, and this is not something right now I think a lot of people are curious about, but we get a lot of emails in August and September and October. What's wrong with my tree? I got a bunch of brown coming out of the middle. What's wrong with my tree? It's dropping some needles down the center. That is what we call flagging. So that's the natural process of that old growth shedding out because it got replaced that spring with the new foliage. So if we have brown on the tips, we got problems. You know, if we have brown branches dying all the way to the trunk from the bottom up or the top down, we have a different problem. If it all looks good and I look into the middle and I've got brown here and brown there, that's the natural flagging process, okay? If the other ones, we got an issue, bring in a sample, get some pictures and get it diagnosed because we might have a bug, might have a disease, we might have something else going. All plants always have certain bugs they get sometimes. Other things might have issues with disease here and there. It's not prevalent in conifers, but if we do have issues, it's something we need to get taken care of right away, okay? So that's the last one. So do you guys, before I'm going to whip through and show you a few plants, do you got any questions so far? Because this is kind of we could split this class into probably 6 classes and do each genus or something.
I have a question.
Yes?
Could you talk about deer resistance as you go?
Yep, I'll mention some as I go, for sure. Yeah, deer is always a huge one. Mr. Deer, and I have Mr. Rabbit in my yard. He loves to eat my things too. All right. So again, we're not gonna give you a test on Latin, but if I kind of follow this, what I call the genus breakdown, it just gives you an idea maybe of the variations in different plants. I tried to bring something of everything up here to show you, just so you can kind of get an idea. Now the first one is Abies. So that's true fir. That's not Douglas fir. That's not any other fir. Douglas fir is a different creature. This is true fir. So our Christmas trees, noble fir, Shasta fir, grand fir, Pacific silver fir, all native stuff around here, alpine fir. Or, you know, we carry some of those as well. Or we have a lot of dwarf options. So if I look at a plant like this, which I have in my yard, I love blue. Brought 2 firs in just to kind of show you the variations. So this is what we call blue prostrate noble fir. So this is a noble fir, just like our Christmas tree, but this is a sport that's got beautiful blue color, and this is never going to give me any height. This is going to cascade and run along in a sunny rockery. I've had one of these go over 20 years now. It might be 2 feet tall, about 8 feet across, and I haven't touched it in probably 12 years with water. This is something down on the South Bank that just, I like the color, the texture. It's softer than spruce. It looks pretty cool if you like blues, but that's an example of kind of a prostrate or spreading dwarf form. You know, or we have more miniature stuff. This is a little Korean fir called Cis. Perfect round shape, full grown. This might be like 2 feet tall, 3 feet wide. This is probably what you're picturing. I just want something nice and tidy that I don't have to mess with. That would be an example of that. That's Cis, C-I-S, a little dwarf Korean fir. Okay? And again, we got other stuff out there. We could go find ourselves a Christmas tree. You know, if we want to get bigger. There's blues, there's greens, lots of different options for other firs out there. I didn't bring a monkey puzzle tree in because those tend to make me bleed. I think we have maybe one large one out there. We'll have some small ones again, but if you want a little taste of Patagonia, there's the Douglas fir from South America. So if you know monkey puzzle trees, I've probably got a couple scars from 30 years ago still on my forearms. Super sharp, super prickly. They're a really cool looking tree, but there's a great example of that's huge, and that's probably not one you want to put by the front door. You know, if we got some room, it makes an interesting specimen out in the landscape, but something you want to limb up so you're not getting whacked as you're mowing your lawn which my neighbor needs to prune his because I can't believe he can get underneath it. But it's just a big plant. It's really cool again, but just something a little different. If you know monkey puzzle tree, I could show you the one I have out there, but I didn't want to bring him in today. All right. Cedrus is our true cedars. So that's like our Lebanese cedars, Atlas cedars. A lot of those cedars are going to be native to kind of the Mediterranean, North Africa, that kind of zone. It doesn't mean they don't grow well here, but they're super drought tolerant. They love the heat. They don't need a lot of water. I've got a couple of these in my yard as well. I brought one in just to kind of show you, instead of, anyone have a deodar cedar? How tall is it? 60 feet? 50 feet? 80 feet? I remember one down by the UW, I saw it down at school, had to have been over 100 feet tall, and the skirt on it's about 60 feet across. So again, maybe not the tree for the common, you know, the new size yards these days, but if you like the idea of it, we get dwarf stuff like this. This is one called Feelin' Blue. So Feelin' Blue, there's Feelin' Sunny if you like a little yellow. But this is something, a great example of weeping things. If we stake it, I could stake that up as tall as I want and then just let it fall down and do its thing. If I leave that alone, I'm going to end up with maybe a chest level plant that eats up some real estate right to left, but is not going to get super tall. If I buy a regular deodar, I'm going to have a huge plant. We don't tend to get regular deodars in anymore because they are quite large. I have a Lebanese in my yard, again, 20 years ago planted, but it's probably a good 40 feet tall. But I chose the weeping for them because I want it narrow to hide a telephone pole in my view. But I don't have to water it again. It's zero maintenance, and it's got a different needle, a little bit different look to the cedars. Okay. Cephalotaxis, I had one. Here's one. So this is what we call Japanese plum yew. So this to me almost looks a little tropical. You can see the smaller one on the front here. This is one called hedgehog. That's got a great name. That's just a dark green, clippable, little foundation plant I could put in sun, some shade. The deer won't do these at all. Anybody who's interested in deer. So I can go low green, like 3-4 feet tall. If I want to clip it, I can. Or if I'm looking for a little bit of height, this will look like a big fat cigar when it grows. Not going to get super wide, but I'll get maybe 6, 8, 10 foot of height, but on a pretty tidy, symmetrical, upright specimen. A lot of people even do these in pots. I've had some in pots before because they're kind of a fun little thriller in the center with other things planted around. But Japanese plum yew, I think it's a little bit underutilized around here. It's got a big old needle, looks a little different for texture, and they call them plum yew because they get a pretty good sized little fruit on there in the fall. So those, when they get pollinated, I'll get about a ½ inch, looks like a little red plum. They kind of look like Christmas lights hanging out on the early fall and early winter. Okay?
Are they poisonous?
They are, yes. I should tell you that too, to keep the kids away from them. I taught my 2 boys when they were young, don't touch the yew berries, because that's not just those, but all yews, period. Big dose of cyanide in there. Okay? The next one's Chamaecyparis. One of these days I'm just going to have an hour class on Chamaecyparis, because that's my favorite conifers. And we do a lot of different Chamaecyparis. We call this false cypress. So thread branch cypress, hinoki cypress, all kinds of cypress around in the genus Chamaecyparis. So see how we can do this the most logical way. So here's 3 right here. You can see up in the front, okay? So here's 3 examples of hinoki cypress, all right? And there's the 4th on the corner, okay? You can see the similarity in the foliage, right? But totally different look on the color, the size, and everything else. So if I want big, I go with what we call slender hinoki cypress. So that'll give me probably 20 foot of height, but only 6 foot of spread. So that's a really common conifer choice for hot sun, drought tolerant. I want to break up the 2-story house, but not have a massive plant that I'm going to have to prune all the time. That's going to give me the height I want, but not the spread. Okay? So that's what we call gracilis or slender hinoki. Now we have nanogracilis. Okay? So this is what we call dwarf slender hinoki cypress. I have probably 5 of these in different areas of my landscape in Everett. 20 years, they're as big as me. Okay? So this is a different creature, same plant, but a great example of you get what you pay for. That's obviously already 6 or 7 feet tall. I'm going to spend not as much as that, but I'm going to spend about $100 for that one, and it's a foot tall. Why? Why is that plant so much money? Because it grows slow and it stays small. This is something, again, never had to prune ever in my yard, but that's the size I wanted permanently. I didn't have room for that, okay? Say I like yellow. Then we do Nana Lutea, which is this with the frosting of yellow. If you like a little bit of color, that's a great one for part sun, part shade, or even to full sun. It's not going to burn in the heat. We don't have that much heat up here, but I need drainage and I need to keep that on the dry side, okay? Now we have the other version. We call this moss on a rock. So this is dwarf Hinoki cypress. So I'll tell you right now, not you in particular, anyone in this classroom, but you customers come in here every week and say, I'm looking for a dwarf Hinoki cypress. Okay, well, what do we, oh no, that's not it. Well, that's not it. And we go through 20 of them. Oh yeah, that looks like the one, because everything is called dwarf Hinoki cypress. Okay, is it really dwarf slender? Is it dwarf yellow? Is it dwarf green? Is it this? Is it that? We probably have 20 different dwarf Hinoki cypresses out there, all right? But I think as an example of a plant, you can kind of see again the choice, the color options, how fast does it grow, and how much room do you have to put it in the yard, because that's going to dictate which one of these pretty plants that we add into the landscape. So this moss on a rock, you know, on the other hand, I've had one of these for over 20 years. Guess how big this is? About 1.5 feet tall and 2 feet across in 20 years. 6 feet by 4 feet in 20 years. You know, that's going to be 20 feet by 6 feet in 20 years. So again, choosing the right variety is going to give me the one I want, okay? So Chamaecyparis, Hinoki. If you like the thread branch cypress, we've got those yellows out there. I think they've renamed this, but I'm old, and so I refuse to succumb to the new Latin. So this is actually Chamaecyparis nootkitensis, or Alaskan cedar. Some reason, some smart guys decided to rename it Xanthocyparis with an X, and I refuse to call it that, so I didn't say that. So this is Alaskan cedar. Now, obviously, Alaska, Pacific Northwest, native still. We could look across the street over here in the neighborhood and see some gorgeous examples of these that are 30, 40. I've seen down in Seattle some 50 feet tall. So this is a weeping type conifer with a leader, but I'm not going to have the spread. If I choose the right one, I've got a little arm for character, but it's not like I have a big, huge, bushy Christmas tree shape. I have something very ornamental and pretty cool in the landscape. You like Dr. Seuss, you like some funky shapes like that, that's a really popular choice and an easy tree to grow up here. You're going to see different varieties of it, a little bit bluer one, a little bit greener one, a little bit narrower ones, a little bit wider ones, but it still is a fairly narrow, upright conifer specimen that's going to give me some character with a little bit of arms hanging. If you go out of here, literally just look up to the blue sky and you probably pick out 4 of them in the sight line here in the neighborhood that all look really cool. And they're all a little different, you know, depending on how they kind of grow, okay? I think that's probably, I think we're good with the Chamaecyparis, all right? Cryptomeria. So these are our Japanese cedars. I had a couple here, there they are. It's like I'm in a forest up here, see? So I think this is one of the coolest conifers because of the different texture. Now again, I can get some different colors. I can get yellow, I can do green, different shades of green. But this is a totally different look. If you look at that needle and the way it grows, it looks almost ropey. It's got a totally different texture than a lot of evergreens. I think, again, more people should use these. I've got a bunch in my yard as well. I've got dwarf ones again, but we could also get tall trees. This is a plant, you know, we can get 30-foot options. If you want a big giant specimen Japanese cedar, well, then we can do that. We can go down. We can get yellow. Again, different choices. The best one around here, probably for most yards, is this one called Black Dragon. So this is one that might end up maybe 10 feet tall down the road, maybe 4 or 5 feet wide. You can see the growers shear them. It's a random branch one, so very easy to shear. This is not one the deer will like again. Typically Cryptomeria, they will not nibble on. So this is one here. You could let it go natural. You could shear it, but this would be, I think, a pretty good choice for most yards for something a little bit, again, different with a different texture. This is one I have down on my bank that grows like a globe. This is one called Golden Promise. So a similar texture I can see again, but now I've got a frosting of yellow on it. So this is a plant that would grow more globe-shaped and rounded naturally. Might end up 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, kind of size down the road. Mine's about 10 years old now. Might be twice that big. And some of these cryptomerias, a lot of people come in and ask about winter interest. To me, all conifers add winter interest because it's green, it's texture, blue, yellow, whatever the color is. But a lot of these will turn color in the wintertime. So if I have a green plant during the season, I walk out after frost and I've got plum or purple or burgundy color. A little bit of interesting texture for the winter. Doesn't lose its needles. There's nothing wrong with it. That's what they do in the wintertime. Okay? So Black Dragon was named for the opposite. This will not turn color. If anything, it gets deeper green is why they called it that name. So some people like winter color, like me. Others are like, I don't stick with my green. I don't care for your other tones in the wintertime. So this would be one that doesn't turn. Okay, this one here, just a little frosted yellow, doesn't turn. You'll still see some out there, if we go look at after class, that still have the burgundy, the plum, the different colors on them. It's still a little bit, because we're not quite warmed up here for spring. Okay? So there's a couple cryptomerias. I did bring in Cypress, but that's our Leland Cypress. So that's a man-made cross. It never really was natural in nature, but that's Cypress with Cypressus. They found a natural cross, and that's a huge hedge plant. Typically, if I see Leland Cypress, it's on a farm, and that's my 50-foot massive wall. I don't care for the species. We don't really get it much anymore because it is so big, and it is drought tolerant, deer resistant, all the things we want, but we tend to get smaller ones in. So we have a new one called Green Rocket. If I was looking to hedge off my neighbor and not have 50 feet, but half of that and half the spread, we would get one of the smaller versions of those back there on the Leland Cypress. Okay? Cypressus is our bright blue in the front here, okay? Or our Monterey cypress with the bright yellows. So if I had this, I'll just smell it because I love lemon. It smells just like lemon pledge. Okay, it really does. If you want to come scratch and sniff, it smells just like I clean the furniture, right? So Monterey cypress has always got kind of a lemony fragrance to them. This is a big, I have 2 of these in my yard. This is a bigger conifer. This is one called Donner's Gold. I can shear it and keep the tidy shape, but if I let this do its thing, I'm going to have a big old specimen evergreen. That's a big plant, but it does take shearing because, again, random branch. Who has Wilma? Wilma Goldcrest. Somebody's got to have one in their pots. That's always the most common yellow little Monterey cypress that goes in the center of the pot. That's the small version of that plant right there. Okay?
We received like a winter planter. A lot of stuff was shoved in.
Had
but
Wilma.
it had this
Lemony
shade.
cypress, yeah.
Is that what it would be?
That's Wilma, guaranteed. Yeah.
Wilma.
They
Okay.
call it Wilma Goldcrest. That's a specific variety of Monterey cypress.
So that's the only thing I can,
Pop
collect
out,
of
put it in
that
the yard.
pot.
A lot of people keep them in the pots because they make a great thriller
Okay.
that I can go back and put flowers around. And
So how big will Wilma get?
you can clip them, but if I let that go, maybe 6 or 8 feet long term. That'd be pretty
Okay.
slow.
Okay. Good.
So in the front here is our Arizona cypress. Now, if I listed out like the top 5 drought-tolerant plants in existence, that would be one of them. So if I plant that out in my garden in sun with drainage, we are walking away. That is a plant I don't think you're ever going to have to water in Washington. You'll see them around, and if you look at them and there's a lot of brown with a little bit of blue, it's because they've been getting watered or they're not in very good drainage. There's a couple down the road here I drive by quite often. Like I should knock on her door and tell her, please don't water that anymore, but she might just not have good enough drainage. So if I had a sunny area and I wanted a big, bright, that is a really cool blue color, big specimen conifer, look at maybe some of those Arizona type cypress or the Cypresses, okay? Ginkgo is the one outlier here. Like, that's not a conifer. Yes, it is. This is the original conifer. So we won't turn this into Discovery Channel today, but you'll have fun if you look up ginkgo. That's a really fun plant. If we go back, literally like 150, 200 million years in evolution, that is the bridge plant between something with a leaf and a conifer. So if you see this leaf out, It'll look like a leaf. It's totally different than most, but it actually produces a cone. So this is the miniature ginkgo called American. But we get some pretty cool ginkgos in. I want something tiny like that, maybe something 10 feet or so. We buy jade butterflies, or we can get gigantic ginkgo if we want a big specimen tree. There's probably very few things in the world that turn as bright a gold in the fall as a ginkgo tree. If you've seen ginkgo in the fall, absolutely spectacular. So, fun tree. Yes?
Do you only carry male plants?
Only carry males. That's you stole my thunder for the next point. Don't buy a female. No offense to the ladies. The ladies stink when we talk ginkgo. So when these fruit out, you're going to go, what is that smell in the yard? Do you have a female ginkgo? Because it smells like sewage, literally, when it comes into flower. So only males. I kind of chuckle because if we drive into Marysville, they just redid 3rd Street on a huge ecological project. If you're down Marysville, if you drive down 3rd, you'll see the medians, ginkgo after ginkgo. And I laughed because I think the first year the city found out, yeah, we probably should have asked, because there were seedlings coming up, which means we had a female in there. And sure enough, like 5 of them had to be removed and replaced because the neighbors said, yeah, please get rid of those trees. So ginkgos are fun if you want something different. Junipers are probably going back to the 1970s. We said the word juniper and everyone goes, I don't want juniper. Who likes juniper? Everyone's like, I don't want any junipers in my yard. This isn't the juniper that got planted at the condo complex in 1975 that grows rat's nests and looks horrible. This is different type of juniper. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but I'm telling you, if you don't want to water, you got hot sun, you want ground cover, you want drought tolerance, you want no deer, all the above. Don't be a juniper hater. This is not the scrubby 3-4 foot stuff that got brown in the middle like it used to be, the old tam. I haven't sold those in 20 years. This is flat ground cover or upright stuff that gives us focal points with superior drought tolerance. So a couple, where did I hide my juniper? It's only right in front of me. So if I look at something like that, I mean, that's a pretty plant. This is golden shore juniper. I could have this on the salt water, take salt spray if I'm on the ocean. We have native shore juniper over on the Pacific coast, but this is something called all gold. It'll be a beautiful lime green yellow. That's it for height. But I want to eat up some room side to side that I don't want to weed and I don't want to water. So if I've got great drainage, hot sun, a lot of the junipers out there might be worth taking a look at. We don't get, again, a lot of this. It's either flat, nice ground cover or shrublets that stay low, or we go for something like this for focal point. You know, this is a juniper, common juniper we call compressa or pencil point. You know, that's it right there. I'm not going to have a branch that's going to flop out. It's going to grow straight up and be an excellent specimen with the silver, the blue, the green that I don't have to ever mess with again for water. Okay? Larch. If you read my 50 Shades of Green in the paper, this is one of my favorite spring. Look at that thing breaking bud. So larch is a deciduous conifer. Okay, this does not keep its needles in the winter. This turned brilliant gold. It dropped all its needles last October, November. It's bare wood in the winter. Now in the spring, we get these beautiful little pea green soft shoots. This is just leafing out for the season. Okay, so this is an example of a deciduous conifer, not an evergreen, that we can have some fun with in the yard. They're really cool to grow. So this is a variety from upstate New York called Romberg Park. That's a shrub. So I could grow this in my yard and have a big 8-foot by 8-foot conifer specimen that gives me fall color, interesting bark, and this really cool growth in the spring. We have a Japanese one out there called Volterdingen. Something sounds funny with that one. That was a German-Japanese larch, right? So that's another one that's a shrub, a little bit smaller. We also have weeping larch, which I think are a quick pause of discussion for weeping. Who has a weeping conifer, like a larch, an Atlas cedar, something like that? Anybody got a weeping one in their yard? So if you choose one, you go to a nursery, and a lot of times you see the trunks are trained like little serpentines, and they're fun. You look at the tag, and you're like, well, why are you lying to me? It doesn't even have a height on it. That's on purpose, because it's up to you on what you want to do with something like that. If I take home a weeping larch, right now it's got serpentine and a little tip growing. If I let it go, it's going to kind of do whatever it wants and more mound than it is going to go up, okay? So I'm going to have a shorter plant that's wider. If I take a stake, I could take that leader and stake it up as high as I want and let it fall down more narrow. Is that kind of making sense? So I could choose, 15 foot tall, 4 or 5 feet wide, or I could choose 5 feet tall and 15 feet wide, if that's what I wanted to do. They're very easy to prune. You can train them in different areas. That's a fun plant to grow, I think, in a modern yard because everyone needs a little bit smaller. They like evergreen, but I can play with the form and kind of get some interesting texture in the form, the way the plant grows, all right? So weeping larch, you'll see out there just as an example of something weeping. Sequoia is just breaking bud here. So this is another prehistoric conifer. We call it dawn redwood. Now we've got regular dawn redwood out there, and we're talking about something down the road that's probably going to be in the 30, 40 feet range. So if you've got room, that's a cool plant. Again, they turn more orangey in the fall than they do gold. The needles will hang on there in the winter. And then we get to about January and a windstorm will kind of knock them all out, make mulch for us, and then the green comes right back out again. So we have a few different forms of Sequoia. Like I said, the tall one is leafing out, but we tend to like the ornamental one. So this is one we call Miss Grace. So this, again, what can you tell by the form? This is a weeping form that I could stake as tall as I want and let it cascade down and do its thing. So I could take this right now, take the stake off, and it'll start to curve over that high, and I'll have a lower one. If I want to stake it up, I can get a little bit more height. So that's another example of kind of something fun, a little bit trainable. And see, if we look at these fabulous tags, well, this one they actually put a height on for a change. If we stake it about 8 to 10 feet. Most of this stuff is going to tell you varies by culture. Varies by culture. What's that? That's what I'm saying. A little confusing sometimes on the conifers. So we would train or prune to what we wanted that to grow in our yard. Okay? So that's Miss Grace. You'll see other Sequoias out there with gold needles. Okay, we got a couple others out there that have spectacular yellow on green, a little bit of color for the springtime as well. We'll call it amber glow. Okay? I didn't bring a microbiota. I forgot my microbiota. So that's what we call Russian Cypress or Russian Juniper, sometimes people call it. And it's actually a pretty worthwhile plant. Super hardy, like 40 below zero. This would be something native up in Siberia, literally. It looks like juniper, but it turns color in the winter. So we call it chocolate. It's not brown. We can't say brown in the nursery business, right? We call it winter chocolate. So it's not a dead-looking brown. It looks like a cool color, like chocolatey brown tips on green. That's in the winter. The springtime, summer, fall, we're green. But that might be an option for folks, again, animal critter resistance, drought tolerant, very low maintenance. But I want to eat up some area. I want something maybe 2, maybe 3 feet tall at the most. But I want to eat up a big area, whether it's sun or shade. That's a plant that we can grow in either one. That's super hardy.
We
okay?
have it on a bank, and
Bank.
it's really great.
It'll be awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's great. Again, keeps weeds down. We don't have maintenance on it. Very easy, super hardy. Just a plant. I think you're seeing it making a comeback. It kind of disappeared for a while, but some people actually come in now, and designers are starting to use a little bit of that for that reason. Erosion control, easy drought tolerant slopes, banks. Or like I said, I got a big area. I just want to fill it up with some green, and I can pop my flowers and plants in front of it. That might be an area to give you that green. Okay. The spruce trees, I brought a couple in, and again with spruce, we could have giant, we could have small, we can have weeping, we can have blue, we can have green, we have yellow. There's a lot of different spruce out there. Our native spruce is always Sitka spruce. Or my little 10-year-old when we used to hike says Sitka Bruce. That's what he calls it still, Sitka Bruce. So Sitka spruce, native all the way down, Vancouver, BC, Alaska, all the way Washington, Oregon. I think the biggest one in the world is out by Seaside down in Oregon. Is a massive one I've been to. But again, not many people have room for a 100+ foot conifer specimen. I like the idea of the native. I like the color, the texture, but I need something smaller. So we get things like this. So this is another Isley plant you can see. that doesn't have a leader, perfect round shape. It's got the perfect silver, blue, green combination like we want on Sitka spruce. Very stiff, prickly texture a little bit. Hot, drought tolerant. Animals, again, we don't get on them. This may be something to think about, you know, as an example of a smaller version of a native tree. We've got Colorado blue spruce. Anybody got a big old blue spruce in their yard? Finally got one? Yeah, so again, Colorado blue spruce really isn't that blue. It's kind of green with blue tips, typically, if we have the species. So for us at Sunnyside, I don't get in the seedling stuff at all. I want the bluest of blue. If I'm going to buy a blue spruce, I want powder blue. I want to look at blue from top to bottom. I don't want any green. So we have cultivars out there like Sester's Dwarf, like the Monty, certain breeds that will stay way smaller and give you the ultimate blue color if that's what you're going for. Again, no animals at all, heat tolerant, drought tolerant, really easy to grow, very low maintenance on those. Now, a company like Isley, you know, here's an example of conifer breeding. So this has been going for 20 years and just got released last year. They spent 20 years hybridizing their own blue spruce collection. This one's called Moonstone. What don't I see there? Great blue color, short plant without a leader. So if I put this in my yard, I'm going to end up, if this is the ground, I'm going to end up with maybe a 3-foot tall, nice globe-shaped, super bright blue spruce. It's not going to get used for the garden. Their other new one out there we got, it's called the Monty, and that looks like a Christmas tree, super dense, but it's not like your blue spruce where I've got gaps and it's huge. This is going to grow like a perfect blue pyramid and get maybe 10 feet tall down the road. Much, much, much smaller on some of those collector spruce. There's another one out there called the Blues. We go back to weeping. It's got leaders and it's got hanging branches. That's again an example of a good blue conifer that I could let train and do what I want to do in my own yard and not let it get so tall but get wide. Okay? I don't think last one here. So this is probably the #1 best-selling conifer on the property, and it has been for probably 10 straight years now. But this is the epitome again of dwarf. This is a little spruce called Push, P-U-S-C-H. So this is a miniature Norwegian spruce, and what does it have? It's got the coolest ever cones on the tips of the branches. So this is from last year. If you were in here in a month, the new needles that come out are bright red. So if I walk out in my yard, I've got green with like scarlet new growth. The scarlet turns into my cones over the summer. Then I've got a fresh crop of cones again to enjoy for next winter too. So, you know, Norway spruce, if we went and found one or some around Marysville, again, I'd be looking at a 60-foot tall by 40-foot plant, you know, in the yard. Green, great texture, great symmetry, but a massive plant. So why don't we get something smaller if we like that plant that we can keep in a pot or actually use in our garden instead of another giant type conifer, okay? A couple of pines, we looked at the ponderosa, an example of a tall grower. We've got Japanese white pine, we got mugo pines, we got all kinds of pines out there. But just to show you a couple, you know, this is a Japanese white pine called Kinpo. So this looks like I've been working on this guy's a little bonsai for about 10 years and I haven't done anything to it. That's how they grow. I want a small plant that's got some blue, some interesting structure to it that I can either grow in the garden as a small specimen or even do it in the pot as well. Pines, the one thing we have to do is just keep them dry. This is not a plant that will do clay. It has no issues with deer or anything else. They will not touch these, but I cannot have this wet. This is not a clay plant. This is not a plant I'm going to put in my garden with an irrigation system to water everything around it. You're going to kill the pine. The rest of your plants are going to be happy. So I have these in my house on the south-facing bank. Again, no water. I let it know when it needs it. Maybe once or twice a summer is it. But I want it to blue. It's got great structure, really cool blue color. So we can do blues. We can do yellows. We can do greens. There's all kinds of great Japanese pines, but probably the top of the totem pole for root rot. We don't want water on those. That's got to be high and dry, okay? If we want to stay small, Some people call these Mr. Magoo pines. We call them Mugo pines, right? So Mr. Magoo here is an example, again, of modern breeding. Now, if I walked in old commercial parking lots or old landscapes and I saw a Mugo pine, dwarf Mugo pine, I'll be bigger than me. You know, like a big shrub. They're like, well, that's not what I wanted. Again, I was picturing that dwarf size. I want something low. So Isley has bred a number of these. This one's called Slow Mount. So again, short, flat. I'm going to get little candles that much a year. I can always cut them if I want to. But I would be surprised if you ever got to 3 feet tall in a slow mount. Last year, the new one came out. It's called Pesto. That's like a carpet, less like 1.5 feet tall is all that gets. But I could choose a variety and probably get a couple of different heights in there. And again, Mugo pine is simple. It's green. It's not going to bloom. It's not like, oh, wow, look at that. It's a great filler that just doesn't need maintenance. Super hardy, super drought tolerant. And again, no issues with the animals, okay? So there's a few pines. Last couple are just maybe some little bit different things. So does anyone have umbrella pine? So that's a cool little conifer. We get more and more of these in as we come out with new flavors. This is a particular one called Piccolo. It's a dwarf one. I wouldn't expect that to get any taller than 4 feet tall. So I'm going to have a nice little tight Christmas tree look. But this has almost got a tropical needle again. Very hardy up here, but it looks a little bit more tropical. We have other ones like Propeller. And if I look down at Propeller, the needle's actually really cool. They actually swirl. Looks like you're looking at an airplane propeller. So a little different on that one. We've got Green Star. We've got other kinds out there. And we have regular umbrella pine. But regular umbrella pine is always going to get tall, pretty narrow. But I might end up with a 15, 20-footish conifer long term. Most of the stuff we have, again, 8 foot, 6 foot, 4 foot, a little bit more manageable, I think, for the landscape. Okay, so that's Cyanopodus, or what we call Japanese umbrella pine. The sequoias, again, anybody got sequoia? How big?
Well, I planted it, so it's not big enough.
So that's a beautiful tree. If you know Sequoia, we got Sequoia National Park down in California. Massive. I think the biggest living creature on Earth still is the General Sherman Sequoia down there in Kings Canyon. It is massive. So it's tall, but it's also really, really wide. This is like redwood trees go 300 feet up. This might be half that, but you're going to have a massive trunk with massive spread. So there's nothing wrong with Sequoia if you got room. It's a great tree. Again, critter resistant, super drought tolerant. We need drainage, hot sun, all that's fine. But I was kind of waiting all these years for something small to come out. We finally have one. This is Sequoia foliage. This one's called Von Martin. So this is a little, look just like it. If you come look at the picture, perfect Sequoia Christmas tree. Where they got this rated now at about 12 by 8. Now that I can have in my yard. In my little yard that's overpacked. I could fit that in my yard somewhere. I don't know that I could fit, 80 feet by 50 feet, kind of thing. So again, weeping sequoia. Anybody got weeping sequoia? Dr. Seuss. Big wavy tip. They grow like telephone poles that kind of wave in the wind. We've got one out in front out here. You'll see them all over the place. Grade School's got a beautiful one down the street here. But that's, again, the weeping form. So tall and narrow gives me the height with some really cool character, but I don't have to worry about so much spread. Okay?
Our sequoia is about 40 feet. Came in a 1-gallon pot 35 years ago.
Still going.
Oh, yeah. And it's in terrible soil. It's like glacial till.
Is it?
Do anything in it.
Just going to say, just walk away. It's
walk
fine.
Away.
There you go. There you go. All right, last couple. Taxodium. I was hoping he'd leaf out by now. That's not dead, I promise you. So this is what we call swamp cypress. Taxodium is another option for a deciduous conifer. It's going to look very close to the larch and these other ones as they break bud here and leaf out. Nice soft, kind of pea green needles. Same thing, these turn like a rusty orange when we get to the fall. The needles cling on for the winter. January, the wind blows them all out. We start over again once a season. So when I bought my house in Everett, I inherited one of these with the trunk probably 4 foot across that somebody had topped and cut in half. So I had to look at it. It was like, I can't look at that. Let's plant something different. So I got rid of mine because somebody had topped it. Otherwise, I would have kept it. Because this is a plant, if you see an old one, it's almost like you've twisted the trunk. Really cool structure. If you see old ones of these, the bark fissures and it looks like it grows in a twisted pattern. Really fun kind of winter interest on them. So this might be something, this is the miniature version Isley put out. So this is, again, the more manageable size for a yard, like 10 foot tall. So I'm going to get down there to a manageable size small tree without getting so huge. Got a big forest up here. Taxus are used, and I just brought a couple up just to show you. But this again, animals. It's not as drought tolerant. I want to make sure that clear. You will take a little bit of water, and it doesn't mind maybe a little bit heavier soils on occasion too. This isn't one that we need to irrigate these a little bit. But if I look at two examples of views, this one and that one, this literally is my two choices. Dark green, something with yellow like these is great, but do I want something low and bushy that I can eat up space, make a hedge, create a foundation planting with? Or am I looking for a focal point, something narrow by my gates where I have mine, the center of a big pot, or I hedge even without a lot of spread? These are plants that will grow straight up like telephone poles, okay? So I can choose my color and my growth habit. The best thing with you is, you know, almost think of this like the boxwood of the conifers. You know, it's not like some of these things where I got to be real careful where I prune. As long as I don't cut the bare wood, if I look at a yew, I've got so many buds on these branches. This is a plant I can grab my hedge clippers and hedge it, row it, clip it back lightly, and keep it nice and dense and controlled and still look very nice, okay? So a little bit more options, I think, sometimes with yew for pruning and also for the shade. I see a lot of yews thriving, again, in that part sun, part shade to even shady areas where some other conifers might struggle a little bit, okay? The Thuyas would be, you know, our big examples of that's going to be like our western red cedar. So who's got western red cedar? Ginormous, right? That's a great tree. There's nothing wrong with it, but that's the top end example. So what we have are a lot of smaller versions of Thuya. Cedars, arborvitaes, different textures and colors again. You'll see like western red cedar out there, we have hybrids now that are half that tall or half that wide. Same plant, same color, the bronzing in the winter, native, all the same, but just a smaller version. There's even a shrub. I think it's one of the best conifers on the property, especially for people that have wet or a little more clay. There's a miniature western red cedar out there. Looks just like the tree, but grows like a shrub. That would be one that's called Grünkrugel. That's one you could throw in there if you had maybe a little more concern with the drainage again or heavier soil. If we look at the arborvitae side, you know, again, some people said they had the living fence, you know, our arborvitae. There's our taller version. We got bigger ones than that. We have a lot of this kind of arborvitae. I want low, something very clippable again, kind of like the yew, that I could have a round look to it. Maybe as a I have 3 of these on the edge of my patio, just as a little barrier before you go into the garden. I could grow this a little taller. I could keep it smaller. Pruning will dictate a lot of the size on the arborvitae. This one's got a great name, Mr. Bowling Ball. That's exactly what he looks like, a big old bowling ball. Okay? That's Frank back there, one of my employees. This is his plant. We call this Frank's plant. This is one called Frankie Boy. Okay, so this is Oriental arborvitae. Got great texture, a little bit more thread branch to it, beautiful yellow. But this is a plant I could get maybe 6 feet tall down the road as it matures. But again, if you're into different things, this is a really fun little conifer to give it a try. Okay? Just for you, Frank. Frankie Boy. Funny part is we even have a different arborvitae called Morgan. That's his wife's name. So we got both of them here. Probably, then I got 2 left here. So this is one, we just planted some of these across the street, the tree version of this. So this is what we call Thuyopsis, or staghorn cedar. So if I look at the bottom of that, that's got some great colors, silvers, really interesting needles, I think, probably as much as any conifer up here. This is the dwarf version. So I want a shrubby, maybe 6 foot by 6 foot Thuyopsis. or I want a tree, which is what we plant. We do a lot of Christmas trees here in the winter. That is the most popular clipped branch of anything we get every year for holiday wreaths, period. And we can't find any anymore. That's why I just planted 3 of them over there. We're going to let them grow, and I'll have an unlimited supply now. But this is one bronze in the winter, and this traditionally from Japan is probably the most deer-proof plant of anything. So if I have this planted, I've had some customers, especially out towards the green belts, that have deer issues in their vegetable garden, plant this as a hedge, a perimeter to say, yeah, you'll walk up and just head the other direction. I'm not even coming in that part of the yard. So you might think of this as a hedge or a special specimen in a spot that says, no, deer, go nibble on that, stay out of this kind of area, because they really are very, very deer-proof, okay? The last thing on there is Thuja. So that's our hemlocks, and I think that's a good one last, because I think a lot of people here, who's got shade? A lot of people with shade, they want some evergreen. There's shrubs we can choose. There's certainly a lot of great shade plants, but for conifers, we mentioned yews a little bit. The other one is going to be probably hemlock. You know, we can have hemlock in pretty deep dark shade. I've got 2 or 3 different in my own yard that give very minimal light, if any, and they thrive in there. So again, we've got giant hemlocks that are native, 60, 80 feet tall. We've got things in the middle, and we have a lot of great dwarf options with some color as well. This is one of the favorite plants in my whole landscape I put in years ago called moonfrost. So this is a Canadian hemlock, a shrub that's got all kinds of white on green. In the wintertime, even a little bit of pink. But, you know, just as an example, I put in one, I don't think I was quite as cheap and got a gallon. I think I got a 3-gallon when I put mine in. It's about 20 years ago. I've never touched it. I don't prune it. I don't do anything to it. And I've got a plant that's about chest level. It's in my shade garden in the back. It's the focal point. Perennials come and go. This comes up. Bulbs grow. I've always got that white on green, nice showpiece as you walk around the house like, ooh, what's that? Right across the aisle from that same plant, I wanted a smaller hemlock. So I have this one as a ground cover. This is one called Cole's Prostrate. We've got one of these in our shade garden here on the property even. So I can plant this, get very little height, and just gently spread a little bit because I wanted some green, some needles in there. And I've got black mondo grass popping up around it, all kinds of fun colors, but it's always got some presence in the wintertime in that garden. The hostas are gone, the bleeding heart's gone, the big azalea that's over the top is deciduous, it's bare. What's left? A cool little hemlock. At least I got some green in there for the wintertime. And this is one I think is about the coolest plant on the property these days. Can you see the texture of that? So this is a really fun hemlock they call hebefolia. So it almost looks like a hebe shrub, the texture of the needles, but very interesting growth. I think that's about as different as anything we have out there. And this one grows a shrub again. This isn't a massive tree. That's a little hemlock that might get about 3-4 feet, 3-4 feet. Very easy to fit into a typical garden, but totally unique texture to me. If you're looking for something different, if you're like, everybody's got one of those, give me something different. That might be a fun one to search out there in the conifers as well, okay? I think we got everything. I think the one I forgot to mention was Podocarpus. Can you see the one on the front here? So I brought 2 up. This has got still winter color. Can you see that? Like that beautiful plum color. That's what we call chocolate. I don't mean like dead brown. I got to dig it out and throw it in the yard waste chocolate. It's like, ooh, that is kind of cool in the wintertime. So that'll be green here during the growing season. That's one called Gelato Red. It's got a little color on it, but especially in the winter, this is one called Red Tips. Now, Podocarpus is a plant you would find more native down in the southern hemisphere, like mountain areas in New Zealand, some areas like that. And it's very, very drought tolerant. I think I'm always surprised when I put Podocarpus in. Like, again, that's a walk-away plant. We really don't have to irrigate those at all. And again, not trees, but shrubs. This is a great one if you're doing kind of, you know, alpine-y, sedum-y gardens with a lot of drought-tolerant stuff, and you're looking for some presence as a specimen. That might be a great conifer to throw in a garden like that because, again, like with like, I don't have to water it. I don't have to water the sedums, the ice plants, and the other things that are kind of close by as well, okay? So that's a whole bunch of conifers. You almost got it in an hour. If you want to do, I think the rain is supposed to stop today for a little while. But you got all week till Friday. Like with all the classes, you got 20% off all the conifers starting today for the week. So if you want to do a little shopping, we've got some great staff out there that can help you find some treasures, whether it's big, whether it's small. I would invite you to do some investigating. There's a lot of stuff out there when we get to conifers. If you go to the Isley website and you like plants like me, you'll probably get lost for a couple hours before you wake up like, oh my God, I've been doing this for 2 hours. There's a lot of choice out there. I mean, I take a plant like Hinoki Cypress, they've probably got 50, 60 cultivars of that on their website, from miniature to big to yellow, every size in between. And that's all of them, pines, cypress, everything. You'll see a massive array. And you might look, as I said, a lot of native stuff. I like the idea of native, but I want something smaller. You're going to find dwarf versions of a lot of the things we might find native around here as well. So do a little investigating, especially with Isley, and most of our cool stuff comes from Isley. You're always going to see those triangle tags. I got QR code with my fancy cell phone, takes me right to the website. You can read all about it if you want to know more. I like their tags because it's garden size, okay? Drives me crazy with conifers. Nurseries put on these tags, grow 6 feet by 4 feet. Well, that's 10 years. I'm not planning on chucking all my conifers in 10 years and starting over again. What does it grow in my garden permanently? That's what that is. How fast does it grow? What the garden size is? Where do I put it? All that stuff is on those tags. I think they have a superior tag system with Isley. So look at those options as you're looking at different choices out there. Okay? So don't forget, do a little shopping. 20% off if you need any conifers. You want to go home and contemplate it, come back on a nicer day. I think I saw the number 6 in front of 4 straight days this week. So I might have to put shorts on. We finally got 60 degrees. That's the rule here. 60 degrees, me and Joe can put our shorts on and start wearing them to work. So I think I saw 66 or 8 even on Tuesday. So it'll feel like August, right? Getting pretty close. So do we got any questions?
Do conifers ever stop growing in the Northwest?
No, and I would say plants don't ever stop growing. I mean, that's the whole thing is we can control some by pruning, but especially things with leaders is one of my pet peeves is topping trees. You know, if we're going to buy that, we have the room to grow it, let it do its thing. Topping it just changes the thing for all eternity. So if they never stop, but if it's a height or a spread concern, get the narrower version, or again, the dwarf or miniature version that we don't have to deal with it down the road. Okay. Got no more? Everybody's conifered out, right? So thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. I know the weather's horrible. We will have the same. We'll do this again in the fall. I like to do 2 conifer classes. We kind of get to see a little bit of spring color right now. In the fall is the opposite. We're going to start to see some things that are turning color for fall. We'll have a little bit of stuff in for the fall planting as well. All right. So thanks for coming.